Most people do not fail at compounding because they are bad at math. They fail because the first years feel like an insult. You put money away, you expect movement, you get a shrug, the account crawls, the market flickers, inflation makes noise, your friends buy things you can see, your portfolio gives you almost nothing you can feel. So you make the most expensive mistake in personal finance. You decide the machine is broken right before it was about to start. I have spent my life watching money behave, not talking about it, not worshiping it, watching it. And what I can tell you is this: the most dangerous period in building wealth is not the crash. It is not the bear market. It is not the recession headline. It is the long, humiliating stretch when your capital is too small to impress you and too important to abandon. That is where most people quit. They do not quit loudly. They do not announce it. They simply decide they will come back later when they can invest a real amount. Later when they make more money. Later when life is less tight. Later when they feel more confident. Later when the market is clearer. Later when the number looks worth it. Later is where compounding goes to die. If you want the truth in one sentence, here it is. Compounding is not a money game first. It is an endurance test disguised as a money game. The early years are not designed to reward your ego. They are designed to test whether you deserve the later years. That is why ordinary people lose to arithmetic that should have made them rich. Let me show you the trap in a way that hurts enough to remember. Picture a man in his mid-20s answering calls in a noisy customer support center. 40 hours a week, around $43,400 a year before tax. After deductions, he sees about $2,619 land each month. Rent takes $1,153. Groceries and transport chew through another $800 and something. By the time the month is done, he is often staring at $50 or $60 in his checking account and calling it survival. That is not a glamorous life. It is not a disaster either. It is the kind of life millions of people live while telling themselves they will invest later. Once life becomes more forgiving, life rarely becomes more forgiving. What changes if you get serious is not life. What changes is the route your money takes through life. One day this man hears an idea that should hit every working adult in the chest. Most of the great results in investing hide in the last stretch of the journey, not the first. The final years carry absurd weight. The back end does the heavy lifting. The explosion happens late. That sounds encouraging until you understand the hidden implication. If the magic lives at the end, then the beginning is not about visible reward. The beginning is about surviving long enough, consistently enough, rationally enough, to still be there when the invisible engine finally catches. That is the whole game. Around the same time, he runs into the same drumbeat from different directions. Start early. Stay in the game. Ignore the noise. Stop pretending the answer is the perfect stock. Stop romanticizing the perfect entry point. Stop waiting for some heroic sum that will make you feel like an investor. You do not become an investor when the number is large. You become an investor when the route becomes non-negotiable. So this man does something that looks almost embarrassingly small. He opens a simple account and sets up a tiny automatic purchase into a plain index fund. $37 a month, not $370. 37. That number matters. It is not impressive. It is not cinematic. It is not enough to brag about. It is simply the amount he can look at without panic. The amount that does not trigger the ancient part of the brain that screams, "Keep everything liquid." You may need it tonight. That is the first lesson most people miss. The right starting amount is not the amount that flatters your ambition. It is the amount your nervous system can tolerate long enough to repeat. You think wealth is built by large numbers. Very often it is built by emotionally survivable numbers. The money leaves after rent and bills settle. It leaves automatically. No ceremony, no speech, no decision each month. And now the real torture begins. Month 1, the account shows almost nothing. Month 2, still almost nothing. Month 3, maybe a bit over $100 in total value, maybe a little less depending on the market. He checks too often. Up one day, down the next. It feels absurd. 2 takeout orders would have felt more real. A pair of shoes would have felt more real. A weekend out would have felt more real. The account is asking for discipline and returning ambiguity. This is where weak financial identities break, because the early phase of compounding is not exciting. It is insulting. I call this the insult phase. The insult phase is when the future sends back such a tiny thank you that your present self feels mocked. You save for months, and the visible gain would not cover a grocery run. You behave better, and your life does not look dramatically better. You deny yourself a few pleasures, and nobody around you applauds because nobody can see the thing you are building. This is why so many people prefer consumption to ownership. Consumption gives instant proof. Ownership gives delayed power. Most people are not addicted to spending because they love the item. They are addicted because spending produces immediate emotional evidence. Investing, in the beginning, produces almost none. So when the news is loud and the account is small, your brain starts lying to you. It says this is pointless. It says I need a real amount. It says I should wait until my income rises. It says I will restart when the market is safer. That voice is not rationality. That voice is present hunger dressed up as prudence. You cannot build wealth by obeying every emotion that arrives in your body. The man I am describing makes one excellent decision. For the first 12 months, he refuses to ask the account to entertain him. He does not demand inspiration from it. He does not require excitement. He does not need emotional payoff. He treats the monthly purchase like electricity or rent. It goes out because it goes out. That move is far more important than picking a better fund system's beat enthusiasm. If your financial life still depends on how motivated you feel that week, then you do not have a financial life. You have a mood. Around month 6, the account crosses a few $100s. Not enough to change his life, enough to change his direction. That distinction matters more than most people understand. A lot of workers spend their 20s and 30s with no line in their life that quietly slopes upward. Their income arrives and disappears. Their energy arrives and disappears. Their stress arrives and compounds faster than their savings. Their graph is a flat panic with occasional spikes of relief. The first meaningful shift is not getting rich. The first meaningful shift is creating a line that no longer resets to zero. That is when dignity enters the room. Then life does what life always does. It punches him in the mouth. A car repair shows up, roughly $489. Now you learn what kind of person you really are. Old habits say liquidate the little investment account. It is small anyway. Start again later. There is always a reason to cannibalize the future when the future is still defenseless. But he does something more intelligent. He works extra shifts. He sells an old game console. He patches the problem without touching the seed account. That decision is bigger than the amount involved. He is no longer treating the account as spare cash. He is beginning to install what I call the lock. The lock is the moment future money stops being negotiable present money. That is not a spreadsheet event. That is an identity event. People think discipline means forcing yourself to do the hard thing once. That is not discipline. That is theater. Real discipline is changing the category. When your investment account is still mentally filed under extra cash, it will eventually be eaten by some emotional emergency, social pressure, or convenience purchase. When it moves into a different category, when it becomes seed capital, future payroll, untouchable ownership, then you start thinking like an allocator instead of a spender. That is the real beginning of compounding. By the end of the first year, he has put in about $444 of his own money, with ordinary market movement. Maybe the account reads something like $469. A year of patience for roughly $25 of visible gain. That is the number that makes fools quit. They look at the result and laugh one full year for that. Yes, and that laughter has made more people poor than bad luck ever will, because what looks small in year one is not proof the machine failed. It is proof you are still too early in the cycle to be rewarded in a way your ego respects. The beginning of wealth is brutally asymmetrical. Effort is immediate. Evidence is delayed. That gap destroys people. In the second year, he does something simple and brilliant. He does not transform his life. He does not pledge some giant heroic. He simply nudges the automatic buy upward whenever he gets a bit more room. $5 more here, a few dollars more there over time. A small raise, not a revolution, just quiet escalation. That is how serious people build capital. They do not wait for perfect conditions. They use every small improvement in cash flow to tighten the route. By the end of year two, he has contributed a little over $1,100 in total. The account might show around $1,229. The gain still looks unimpressive to anyone infected with social media poison. But something crucial has happened. The account has begun to separate from his labor. I call this the second shift. During the first shift, only you work. During the second shift, your money begins to work after you clock out. At first, that second shift is pathetic. It earns almost nothing. It looks like a child pretending to help. But if you protect it, feed it, and refuse to rate it, it grows teeth. Most people never get to the second shift because they keep firing their capital every time life gets uncomfortable. And that brings me to one of the ugliest truths in the entire subject. The people who struggle most financially often do not lose because they are less intelligent. They lose because fragility keeps forcing them to liquidate seeds. A broken car, a thin checking balance, a sudden trip, an emotional purchase after a hard week, a minor rent increase, a few bad months. Each one seems understandable in isolation. Together they create a life where the future is continuously harvested to pay for the present. That is why buffer matters so much. Not because buffers look sophisticated, because buffers protect the compounding root from routine violence. Your emergency fund is not just cash. It is a bodyguard for your investments. If you are constantly touching what was supposed to grow, then you are not compounding. You are interrupting. An interruption is a far more common enemy than bad returns. By now, the man has seen enough to understand that the amount matters less than the continuity. His monthly contributions crawl from the 30s into the 50s, then the 60s, then eventually higher. A tax refund appears one year, and he throws part of it into the account. He packs more lunches. He trims a few automatic pleasures that were never really pleasures, just habits wearing pleasure's clothes. This is where the social trap tightens. The world around you will always try to teach you the wrong lesson from your rising income. When you earn more, the world wants evidence that you earn more. A better apartment too soon, a nicer car too soon, a more expensive social life too soon. Status purchases arrive dressed as self-respect. What they really do is delay the day your money becomes stronger than your effort. I have no objection to it. I object to confusing display with progress. The worker mentality asks, what can I upgrade this year? The owner mentality asks, how much more permanent capacity can I route into the future this year? Those are not the same question. One builds applause. The other builds refusal power. Refusal power is one of the most underrated assets in the world. It is the ability to say no without panic. No to a bad boss. No to a bad deal. No to desperation. No to the job that pays but shrinks your soul. No to the purchase that flatters you today and weakens you tomorrow. Early investing is not really about making the account pretty. It is about manufacturing refusal power in slow motion. By year 5, this man is in his early 30s. He earns a bit more. He trains newer employees. The monthly contribution has grown into something like $112. Over 5 years, he has contributed a little over $5,300. The account may sit just under $6,400. Again, the ignorant observer laughs. 5 years for 4 figures. 5 years for a gain that still feels small. Yes, and that observer still does not understand the machine, because the machine is not rewarding the visible surface yet. It is thickening the base. It is extending the runway. It is training the identity. It is proving the route. It is changing the kind of person you are long before it changes the kind of house you live in. If you still judge compounding by the first few visible dollars, you are judging an oak tree by the first crack in the soil. Around this stage, something subtle but powerful happens. The investor begins to feel that the account has a life of its own. Not a big one, not a dramatic one, but a separate one. Dividends get reinvested. Market rises do a little work without being asked. The gap between contributed capital and total balance stops looking like random dust. This is the point where many people could accelerate if they wanted to, but they do not need to do it through drama. That is another mistake. Poor financial education creates. It makes people think wealth is built in cinematic bursts. Huge pivot, massive bet, perfect stock, legendary year. The truth is uglier and more useful. Most fortunes that endure are built through routinized sanity, boring contributions, boring reallocation, boring restraint, boring patience, boring survival through non-fatal mistakes. The word boring scares people because they still believe the point of money is stimulation. The point of money is control. If stimulation is what you want, then yes, investing intelligently will disappoint you. If control is what you want, intelligent investing is one of the few honest routes that exists. Now, let us talk about the thing almost nobody is emotionally prepared for, the bend. Textbooks love the bend. Charts love the bend. Finance people point to the bend as if it were a motivational poster. But the bend is dangerous in its own way because most people want the bend before they want the years required to earn it. Around year 8 or 9, if the route has stayed alive and contributions have kept climbing modestly, the account begins to behave differently. Total deposits might be in the low 5 figures. The balance might push far beyond that. In a good stretch, the growth begins to rival or exceed what the investor added from wages. That is when the machine starts talking back. I call this the handoff line. Below the handoff line, you are the primary engine, and capital is an assistant. Above the hand, capital begins carrying a share of the load that is too large to ignore. This is where ordinary workers finally experience something most of them have only heard described. Their past self starts working harder than their present self. That sentence should stop you cold. Your present self is tired. Your present self is aging. Your present self is vulnerable to layoffs, illness, boredom, and bad management. Your present self has only so many hours, so much attention, so much cortisol tolerance. But your past self, if he kept routing money forward for years, becomes an invisible labor force. That is the whole miracle. Not that money magically grows, that your past discipline becomes future labor. When people say money works for you, they usually say it lazily, like a slogan. I want you to hear it properly. Money works for you only after you work for it long enough without demanding immediate applause. That is why compounding is so morally revealing. It exposes whether you are the kind of person who can endure delayed validation. Most cannot. They want the market to make them feel smart in the first year. They want the balance to justify the sacrifice in the first 18 months. They want visible proof before the proof is mathematically due. And because they want emotional interest before they have earned financial interest, they sabotage the process. Let me make it even more practical. Suppose your contribution is only $29 a month. Fine, protect the route. Suppose it is $50. Fine, protect the route. Suppose you can only manage $100 and life feels tight. Fine, protect the route. The amount matters. Of course it matters. But at the beginning, the route matters more. A weak route with occasional large bursts still loses to a strong route with survivable repetition. You do not need a perfect life to start compounding. You need a route that can survive your imperfect life. That means automating what can be automated. That means reducing the number of times emotion gets a vote. That means building enough cash buffer that a repair bill does not eat your seed. That means refusing lifestyle upgrades that convert future payroll into present decoration. That means understanding that the market's short-term moods are irrelevant compared with the long-term continuity of your route. It also means you must stop using other people's visible spending as your scoreboard. This is where psychology becomes more important than arithmetic. Wealth is what you do not see. You see the car. You do not see the monthly transfer that did not happen because of the car. You see the vacation. You do not see the years of delayed compounding that paid for the vacation. You see the renovated apartment. You do not see the shrinking refusal power behind the walls. Society trains you to admire evidence of consumption. Because consumption photographs well, compounding photographs terribly for a very long time. A person quietly buying a plain index fund every month for 9 years is not socially interesting. A person making loud financial decisions that is why noise so often beats strategy in public, while strategy beats noise in private. If you want to be free earlier than the crowd, you must get comfortable looking less impressive than the crowd for longer than the crowd can tolerate. There is no escape from that trade. And yes, there will be years when the market falls. There will be stretches when your balance looks injured. There will be headlines designed to scare the average person out of his own future. This is why your framework matters. If you think the purpose of investing is to feel good each quarter, volatility will break you. If you understand that volatility is the price charged for long-term ownership of productive assets, then you will stop acting surprised every time the bill arrives. I am not telling you never to adjust. I am telling you not to confuse discomfort with failure. The man in this example eventually reaches a point where, in a strong market year, the account might rise by $3,000 or $4,000 without any heroic change in contribution. Think about what that means psychologically. Years earlier, that kind of progress would have represented almost unthinkable savings discipline. Now it can happen because old dollars matured into useful employees. This is why the later years feel almost unfairly generous. Not because the universe suddenly became kind, because the small, early, boring dollars had decades to recruit returns, and those returns recruited more returns, and eventually the process that once looked dead starts looking almost supernatural. It was never supernatural. It was merely hidden by time. And time is where most people lose courage. Let me speak directly to you now. If you are at month 3, do not ask whether the account is exciting. Ask whether the route is alive. If you are at year 1 and the visible gain feels laughable, do not ask whether compounding works. Ask whether you have survived the insult phase without surrendering your identity. If you are at year 3 and life keeps throwing small emergencies at you, do not ask whether you should pause forever. Ask whether you can protect the lock long enough that the future stops being optional. If you are at year 5 and the number still does not look life-changing, do not insult the machine by demanding that the middle behave like the end. The early years and the late years do not feel the same because they are not doing the same job. The early years build the worker. The later years reward the owner. That is why so many people remain permanent employees of their own money problems. They never stay with a process long enough to cross the handoff line. They keep restarting. They keep rating, they keep upgrading life, right when the route begins to strengthen. They keep mistaking motion for progress and relief for strategy. A person who saves nothing has one worker in the house. A person who saves inconsistently has a frequently absent worker in the house. A person who builds and protects a compounding route is slowly hiring a tireless worker that does not sleep, does not complain, and does not ask whether it feels inspired. That is the second shift. And the second shift, once it grows large enough, changes everything. It changes how much humiliation you tolerate for a paycheck. It changes how quickly a setback can crush you. It changes how much nonsense you must agree to in order to survive. It changes how urgently you need approval. It changes the texture of your days because fear takes up less floor space in the mind. That is why I get impatient when people talk about investing as if it were just a hobby for people with spare money. No, investing done rationally and early enough is the slow conversion of stress into options. The account balance is just the visible part. The invisible part is who you become while building it. You become less reactive, less desperate, less seducible by status, less available for financial self-betrayal. And if you keep going long enough, the machine begins doing something almost magical. It gives you back time, not by slowing the clock, by reducing how much of your life must be sold just to remain standing. That is why the beginning matters so much. Not because the first dollars are powerful on their own, because the beginning decides whether there will be a middle, and the middle decides whether there will be an end worth reaching. Never forget the cruel arithmetic of this subject. The last years matter most, which means the first years are sacred. Sacred because they are fragile. Sacred because they are unimpressive. Sacred because nobody claps for them. Sacred because the person who can survive them is exactly the person later compounding is designed to reward. I do not care whether your first automatic purchase is $37, $29, or $100. I care whether it leaves every month without negotiation. I care whether you build enough buffer that ordinary life cannot keep murdering your seeds. I care whether you keep your lifestyle slightly behind your income instead of pushing it ahead of your future. I care whether you can tolerate looking foolish to people who only recognize outcomes after they are obvious. Because one day, if you do this right, something will happen that almost nobody can fake. You will open your account and realize the growth came from old discipline, not today's effort. You will realize your younger self, who felt broke, unimpressive, and late quietly built a machine that is now carrying part of your life. You will realize the years that looked like nothing were not nothing. They were construction. And then you will have to confront a final question. When the machine was small, did you treat it like spare change or like a future employee? That is the test. Because if you keep treating every seed like expendable money, you will spend your whole life working day shift for a future that never hires a night shift. But if you protect the route, lock the seed, survive the insult, and keep feeding the second shift until it reaches the handoff line, then one day the machine will begin doing what poor decisions never can. It will begin carrying you. And when that day arrives, the tragedy is not that compounding took so long. The tragedy is that most people quit just before they would have seen proof, so choose. You can keep demanding immediate evidence from every dollar and remain a servant of the present. Or you can build the second shift in silence. Let the boring years pass and force time itself to report to you later. That door does not open with brilliance. It opens with repetition. Walk through it or keep starting over.